Within this research paper, we will dissect the evolution of the entertainment industry and how they use streaming services to adapt to a new normal and survive the COVID-19 pandemic. It started out with fewer TV programs, sparse movie releases, and an overall decrease in box office revenue. We saw Broadway plays completely shut down, movie theaters close, and union workers suffer. While certain areas of the entertainment industry had trouble staying afloat, streaming services, specifically Netflix, flourished beyond belief. From the comfort of your own home, viewers were able to watch the latest and greatest TV shows and movies with the click of a button. Because convenience is a major factor, this allows for content to be distributed to a wider audience, creating popularity for streaming services during these trying times. Through a series of interviews with 5 avid Netflix users, we asked a variety of questions which will help us to understand how Netflix communicates to the public during a time of hardship. We learned how anxiety, genre preference, and time contributed to the rise of the popular streaming service. Additionally, by asking these same questions in a survey to more than 40 Netflix viewers, we were able to collect enough data to support our claims, and easy access to thousands of TV shows and movies through Netflix was a huge resource in millennial survival of the COVID-19 pandemic. Through these interviews and surveys, as well as several scholarly articles, texts, and websites, we have learned a great deal about the entertainment industry's survival of the COVID-19 pandemic and as the accelerated rise of Netflix as a result. Our research objective is to find out how the entertainment industry recovered from the COVID-19 pandemic, whether easy access to thousands of movies and TV shows helped millennials cope with the anxiety of the pandemic, and if there was ultimately a shift in preference of TV shows and movies to more lighthearted genres, in order to provide an escape from the horrors that were going on around us. Using several scholarly texts, articles, and websites, we were able to gain a further insight into this matter and understand how the entertainment industry was able to beat the odds and continue to survive the COVID-19 pandemic. Quote, while the effects of the virus in the entertainment industry may pale in comparison to the clear threat to human life, people making a living in the arts, especially in production and distribution, are feeling the ripple effects of the virus. End quote. Even though the entertainment industry faced many challenges, they were able to recover much quicker than the rest. One of the factors that heavily contributed to the rise of Netflix during the pandemic was the sudden shutdown of everything around us, leading to a rapid increase in hours of TV shows and movies watched from home, also known as binge watching. So many people were out of work, out of school, and had nothing better to do than sit down and watch Netflix for hours on end. We were able to utilize several scholarly articles that had this same thought, and highlighted the rise of Netflix and other streaming services through hours of binge watching as a way to pass the time. Quote, with gyms and sports fields closed and with many people wary about going outside even to run, watching television shows and movies remain one of the few options available as a means to relax and wind down. End quote. Quote, isolation and contract restriction enforce a significant change to children and adolescents' daily routine and psychological well-being. End quote. Quote, binge watching on Netflix contributes to escaping reality and seeking relief from boredom caused by the lockdown. End quote. They also repeatedly refer to this phenomenon as one more episode syndrome. As everyone's responsibilities came to a pause, they had more time on their hands to be able to sit down, relax, and watch TV shows and movies with friends and family. This formed a camaraderie among so many, giving people something to talk about on a daily basis. Quote, a poll of 1,500 Netflix members found that their participation has grown substantially before COVID-19. The number of people who subscribed to Netflix and watched more than 10 hours per week was 16%. During the pandemic, the number grew to 38%. End quote. According to Wendy Lee at the Los Angeles Times, quote, the company gained 15.8 million global subscribers, surging ahead of Wall Street's expectations of 7.6 million. It now has a total of 183 million customers. Netflix generated a net income of $709 million, or 1.57 earnings per share in its first quarter, more than double from a year earlier. Revenue during the same period rose 28% to $5.77 billion. End quote. Despite the challenges most industry faced during this time, it is clear that the entertainment industry thrived and will continue to do so in the future. Through quantitative survey research, we were able to gain a better understanding of the entertainment industry, specifically Netflix, and how they overcame the COVID-19 pandemic. We were able to find meaningful patterns among the data that addressed 2 research questions. The common statistical tests used were correlation, multiple regression, and factor analysis. Correlation tests to see the relationship between 2 interval or ratio variables, Multiple regression is used to determine how much of one variable can be predicted by another, and factor analysis examines if there are underlying structures. Just like quantitative research, qualitative interview research analyzes themes and patterns that address our two main research questions. This process can be described as a thematic analysis process. By conducting a mix of both qualitative and quantitative research in one study, we were able to compare data found over multiple survey subjects and form relationships between several different factors, as well as pinpoint specific themes and categories with details acquired in interviews. When it came to the interview process, we conducted a standardized interview for 5 individuals via Zoom. These individuals ranged in age from 25 to 27 years old and answered a series of questions in the exact same order. Some of the questions had yes or no answers, while others required a more in-depth response. On top of Zoom interviews, we conducted a questionnaire survey that was distributed via Google Form to 50-plus individuals. We used a cluster random sampling method, which involved multiple levels of random selection. This sampling method included both large and small areas of the population. The questionnaire survey had a list of roughly 20 preset questions asking about personal behaviors, interests, opinions, and experiences. Using selective coding, we were able to decide on 4 major categories of information: interviewee introduction questions, COVID-19 pandemic anxiety, preferred genres of content, and time watching Netflix. These 4 major categories related to other smaller categories found within all of the interviews, including basic questions, COVID-19 pandemic, etc. Within these smaller categories are themes that we found throughout all of our interviews that need to be further advanced and elaborated on with additional research. These smaller themes include Netflix as a nighttime hobby turning into binge watching all day, shift in content preference, and what is or is not entertaining, etc. After administering our survey to 50-plus friends and family, we received 46 total responses for review. Using thematic analysis, we found that while most of our participants stayed within the often category both before the pandemic and during the pandemic, the percentage of the very often category went up 21.7% because of the pandemic, and our assumptions were further confirmed when 73.9% of our participants said yes when asked if their hourly intake of watching TV shows and movies increased throughout the pandemic. The majority of our participants binge-watched TV shows during quarantine, leading to increased hours of viewing time. We were surprised to see that 84.8% of participants did not see a shift in their regular pattern of watching TV shows and movies, and 54.3% marked no to reaching more for comedic and lighthearted content as a way to escape. This may be due to the fact that 78.3% of participants marked comedies and romantic comedies already as their favorite genre, so the shift was not necessary. Lastly, it was a solid tie between participants on whether they still use TV shows and movies as an escape from their own reality. But 97.8% of participants are not interested in content that incorporate the struggles of the COVID-19 pandemic.
The major categories pertaining to this question include COVID-19 pandemic anxiety, preferred genres of content, and time watching Netflix. All interviewees leaned towards watching lighthearted and comedic material versus heavier content as it eased anxiety and made for positive thinking. Interviewees all had a common interest in rewatching their favorite comfort and nostalgic shows. Most, if not all, of our interviewees found comfort in Netflix. They used Netflix as a way to escape reality and fill their free time. All interviewees preferred not to watch TV shows and movies that incorporated COVID-19. All of our interviewees found comfort in watching Netflix due to isolation and tons of free time. They used Netflix as a way to cope. Netflix was also a way of bringing family and friends together. All interviewees said they used Netflix as a way to escape what was going on in the world around them. Netflix was a way to stay positive and ease symptoms of anxiety. And all interviewees had a common interest in rewatching comfort shows. In regard to survey results, while most of our participants stayed within the often to a few days per week category, both before the pandemic and during the pandemic, the percentage of the very often to everyday category went up from 10.9% before the pandemic to 32.6% during the pandemic. Our assumptions were further confirmed when 73.9% of our participants said yes when asked if their hourly intake of watching TV shows and movies increased throughout the pandemic. The majority of our participants binge-watched TV shows during the pandemic, which may have led to the increasing hours of viewing time. 84.8% of our participants did find comfort in the content provided by Netflix Inc. However, only 37% stated 37% stated that they connected with the content as a coping mechanism. Rather, they tended to connect with each other over the content provided, as 95.7% of participants felt a sense of camaraderie with friends and family over specific TV shows and movies. All interviewees preferred to watch lighthearted and comedic genres versus heavier content. All interviewees felt this was a better way to stay positive and cause less anxiety and stress. All interviewees leaned towards watching lighthearted and comedic material versus heavier content as it eased anxiety and made for positive thinking. Interviewees all had a common interest in rewatching their favorite comfort and nostalgic shows. Most of our interviewees increased their Netflix intake post-COVID versus pre-COVID to cope with anxiety, keep a positive mind, and fill free time. There was not a major shift in content preference as our interviewees stuck to their roots. Interviewees did say if they had to pick between lighthearted and comedic versus heavier content, they would not choose the heavier content. Most, if not all, interviewees did not like watching TV shows or movies that incorporated the COVID-19 pandemic, as they used Netflix as a way to escape reality. In regard to the survey results, we were surprised to see that 84.8% of participants did not see a shift in their regular pattern of watching certain TV shows and movies, and 54.3% marked no to reaching more for comedic and lighthearted content as a way to escape the outside world. This may be due to the fact that 78.3% of participants marked comedies and romantic comedies as their favorite genre through and through, so the shift was not necessary as they continue to stick with the lighthearted content. There was a solid tie between participants on whether they still use TV shows and movies as an escape from their own reality, but 97.8% of participants are not interested in content that incorporates the struggles of the COVID-19 pandemic. We found that the majority of our participants were females between the ages of 25 to 30, had an occupation of a teacher or nurse, and all had an increase in TV and movie intake during the pandemic. According to Rahman and Arif, despite the lower amount of original content, adults are spending more than an hour on streaming services every day. Netflix is the platform of choice during the pandemic with a 34% share in video streaming distribution in American households. It is apparent that more free time at home is leading to more streaming, especially nonstop streaming of content on Netflix. After comparing our data with extant literature, it is clear there is a major comparison. Our records indicate 97.8% of our participants are Netflix Inc. subscribers, and 95.7% of our participants were subscribed prior to the pandemic. Both of those numbers are a clear indication of how popular the Netflix Inc. streaming services are. Overall, the streaming service industry significantly increased throughout the pandemic due to the state of the world being on lockdown. One can only wonder what long-term implications binge watching will have on children, teenagers, and adults as the years go on. Regarding the overall scholarly discussion, our research gets us just that much closer to really understanding the importance and boom of streaming platforms like Netflix. Learning a little bit about what attracted millennials to this service amidst a global pandemic added to the discussion of how the service boomed while the industry was doomed to plummet, as well as how the service will continue to get rave reviews in the future. After months of success, Netflix took a turn for the worse and stock prices began to plummet. Many are asking why the streaming service is going downhill. After the fourth quarter earnings were released, stock prices significantly decreased. We believe in the next several months, both qualitative and quantitative methodologies should be used to gain an in-depth understanding of the current situation. We also believe there should be a focus on the present-day standings of the production company and how the company will overcome the slump. It can be concluded that Netflix Inc. was one of the leading coping factors for individuals throughout the pandemic, leading to its success amidst trying times for not only the entertainment industry, but the world around us. Individuals of all backgrounds took to Netflix to come together and find comfort in the provided content as well as with each other in order to survive. We found that easy access to thousands of movies and TV shows provided by Netflix Inc. did help millennials to cope and probably will continue to do so in the future. While we found that there was not an exact shift in preference for movies and TV show dramas, comedies have always been and probably will always be a top choice for millennials. Although there is a current downward curve for the streaming service, we are sure they will bounce back in time and there will always be a need for the platform. This only begs the question of how this need will affect these generations coming out of the pandemic.